Hello everyone and welcome once again. My name is Martin and I'm a software engineer here at Mews, where I work as a part of the API experience team where we are developing a public API that our partners can use and build some cool stuff on top of the Mews platform. And it's kind of ironic that I work in API team, but I don't really get to touch the OpenAPI specification very often. Because normally what we do some changes in the controller, and then we let the generator do its magic and generate the specification for us. When the specification is generated and the Swagger launches, I call it a win and don't care too deeply about the generated specification. But a couple months ago, I was kind of forced to switch the teams and go from code first to spec first and write my first OpenAPI specification from scratch. So today I want to share with you my experience, what I did correctly, mainly what I did wrong, so you don't have to repeat my mistakes and make your life a little bit easier. But before we start, I'm actually curious who came to this talk. Would you be so kind and raise your hand if you are more like a spec-first team? Like you feel comfortable editing the OpenAPI specification, doing big changes, not just making something required or not? Can you raise your hand? Okay, that's perfect, because otherwise you would be bored. So, before I start, let me give you a little bit of context, how I got into the Spec-First. So, Mews is a property management system, and which basically means that we write the software that the hotels run on. And we take care of a wide variety of things, starting from the booking engine, through payments, revenue management, all the way to making sure that your room is clean once you check in. And one part of this big puzzle is loyalty. And loyalty at Mews is the same thing just like your bill card. You are collecting points, and you can exchange the points for some free stuff, for some discounts, or some room upgrades. And loyalty in Mews was its own internal system. And a couple months ago, there was a partner that wanted to start using the Mews system, but they want also to keep using their own loyalty. And in this case, this partner had already existing public API, so they just asked us if we can find some way how to integrate their loyalty into our loyalty. So basically, all we did is that we created an abstraction that we call loyalty integration, and we connected it with the external loyalty with their public API. That was fairly simple. But then there was another partner, and this one wanted to do the same thing, but they didn't have any existing public API. So they asked us if we can create some specification and share it with them so they can implement the specification and integrate this way to our loyalty. And this is how I got here, because there's no way to do it code first. Because when you do code first, you write the server side, and then you use some generator to generate the specification from the server side. But in this case, we are not implementing the server side. If I would really try hard to do it code first, I would have to write some dummy controller with dummy DTOs, and then use this dummy controller to generate the specification, and then keep this half-dead, half-alive code in our code base, kind of like a zombie code. So we decided to do it correctly and write the specification. And so at the beginning, I was very naive. My idea was to open the VS Code, take a little bit of inspiration from the first partner's public API, and just tweak it a little bit to make it more aligned with the way how we use the loyalty. But that showed up to be not a good idea. I started thinking, like, how can I approach this problem? Do I go simply with REST API, or do I go fancy with GraphQL or gRPC, or do I go full async with webhooks? So I needed to take a couple of steps back and start thinking about the limitations of the system, what are the requirements, like to know like what is the goal, what I'm designing. So instead of writing YAMLs, I opened a Miro board and started writing down the user stories to fully understand what's happening. I started thinking about the data. What data do I need to send the partner? What data do I need to receive from the partner? And I draw a sequence diagram to know how the request will interact with each layer in the system. And after that, it's kind of funny because we came back to the conclusion that REST API is probably the best approach because simplicity is the king. And at the end of the day, we'll be not the one implementing the server side. So it's probably a good idea to keep it simple so we don't bring any complexities that don't bring any value or don't solve any bottlenecks. So okay, now I knew kind of what is my goal, and I opened the VS Code one more time, but still didn't feel very confident writing any YAMLs. So the main reason was that I didn't go that deep into the specification or into the details, so I still needed to do more digging deeper. So instead of writing YAML, I went back and started writing sentences in text editor. Basically, I started writing documentation where I tried to do try to think about as many details as possible. And that was actually good. That showed out to be a good decision because I was able to share this documentation with other people in my team, with domain experts, and also with the external partners. We were able kind of to brainstorm about the final specification, kind of. And one funny thing is that I started thinking about how the individual endpoints should look like. And I was very eager to do it as RESTful as possible to make as many API nerds as possible very happy. So I started like this. One of the endpoint was search, and this is a simple fetch endpoint. So since it's fetch, I will use get. Let's make the root resource-based. So I'm fetching members, so /members. And then let's put the filtering parameters as a query parameters. Beautiful. Then we have second endpoint, and that's refresh. And this one is very similar story. So we are also fetching data, but this time we are fetching memberships, and we are getting them based on the ID. Also pretty good. And the last one is enroll, and this one is actually creating some resource. This one is creating members resource. So I picked post /members. But then we started thinking about it a little bit more, and we realized that, for example, in case of the search endpoint, there's not going to be just first name and last name. There's going to be much more customer details, like email, phone number, and many more, including address. So we're starting to worry about the URL size, because there is a limit of the URL size, and normally it's 2,000 characters, but it really depends on the server configuration. So, and since we don't have control over the server configuration, we wanted to play it safe, so we decided to scratch this idea and put the query parameters into the body. But in order to put them into the body, you need to change get to something else. So we decided to go with post /members. Not as good, but still okay. But then we realized another problem. We already have the same road. We have post members for search now and also for enroll. So that needed a change as well. So we need to further specify this endpoint. So we add like differentiator, or how to call it, /search. And the same thing happened with refresh, because we are not actually getting the memberships by integer ID, but we are using GUID, and we can get up to 100 of them. So that can overflow pretty quickly as well. So we scratched this idea as well and did the same thing as with the search. We changed it to post, memberships, and add identifier called list. So here goes my dreams about RESTful API. My next step was, I finally collected all the information, so I thought that I can start writing, finally, some specification, but it's pretty scary, because even though you have just a couple of endpoints, it can have like hundreds of lines of code. So I decided that it doesn't make sense to do it by hand in this AI age. So I was looking for some jumpstart, for something that will help me to write at least some draft that I can iterate over them. So I took one more step back and used the documentation that I wrote. I converted it into PDF, sprinkled a little bit of AI magic, and I got pretty good draft. And it was surprising, but it was really good. And actually, it's not that surprising, because LLMs are pretty good with this kind of stuff. They saw probably thousands of specifications, and all of them are same. So yeah, it worked really well. The problem became when I started polishing this specification, because I used ChatGPT Canvas, and for example, I wanted to change or tweak some endpoint, but I need to change the endpoint. It fixed the problem that I wanted to fix. But as a bonus, I got rid of some schemas, and it completely broke some other endpoints. And that became frustrating pretty fast. So I decided to take the best draft that I got and do the rest by hand, get my hands dirty. So I used some of the tools that are available. And there is a lot of tools in this space. So I will tell you about the tools that I used. The first group are linters and validators. Linters and validators are basically your spell check with a little bit of OCD. It basically makes sure that your syntax is good, that you're not missing any descriptions, any examples, basically following the good practices. And probably the best known linter and validator is Spectral. The good thing about the Spectral is that it allows you to use rule sets that are predefined, like the industry standards, but you can also tweak them however you want and make it to your likings. And this is especially useful when you're collaborating on the specification with other people, so the specification looks the same and you don't have any formatting issues. Another tool that I liked is Rate My OpenAPI from Zuplo. And I liked it because you can just upload there your OpenAPI specification and you get really nice score with recommendations what you should fix in order to get the score higher. And they also sprinkled in a lot of cheesy jokes and puns, which I really enjoyed. And here is my first mistake, because for some reason I didn't use these tools at the beginning. The first thing that I did was, of course, I generated C# client and started coding. And that forced me to jump like back and forth, editing the OpenAPI specification. And that's really not something that you would like to do. Like, use these kind of tools right from the start. It's going to make your life so much easier. Next group of tools are editors. I spend most of my time in VS Code with a couple of extensions. These are probably the three most important extensions. The first one is OpenAPI Editor. This one allows you to jump around the specification faster, because the specification can get pretty long and you don't want to scroll all day. So you can jump between the endpoints and between the schemas. Then we have Spectral, we just talked about it, and Swagger Viewer is also fantastic because it shows you the Swagger UI directly in the VS Code. Disadvantage of VS Code is that you need to set it up, and especially if you are not used to, if you are not using VS Code in your day-to-day life, it can get pretty difficult and take some time. So if the specification editing is just like one-off job, it's probably a good idea to try something like Swagger Editor. It's a web-based editor that works basically out of the box. All you need to do is to copy-paste your specification, and you get immediately on the right side Swagger UI, and underneath you get a list of warnings and errors. Another tool that I didn't use that much, actually I didn't use this one at all, but I find it interesting. It's called Stoplight Studio, and I find it interesting because you can switch there between the code and form. So if you want to avoid some YAML headaches, you can stay in form and create or edit the specification using the UI. And another tool that is worth mentioning that I didn't try much because I found about it when I was preparing for this talk is OpenAPI Doctor. And it looks absolutely stunning. It's like a cyberpunk-themed editor. It doesn't actually help you much with the writing of the specification, but it really gamifies the polishing part. You can see like the progress bar with all the mistakes that or things that are missing in the specification. It's really nice. It's really well done, and definitely worth trying. Next, we have documentation generators. There is like so many of them. We tried Zudoku because it's from Zuplo, and we like their tools. And it's very simple to use, basically. You just need like 2 commands to get your documentation ready. And there is a lot of customization. We didn't do much customization yet, but you get really fast, really nice documentation that is interactive. You can even test your API, so that's really good. The only thing that I hated about it is that you kind of realize how bad are your descriptions and examples, because you kind of start looking at it from more like a customer perspective, so that forces you to improve it a little bit. And the last group of tools are my favorite C# generators, because you get finally to code. I picked the NSwag because I had some previous experience, and I also like that it's .NET based. It generates pretty good C# code, and I really like that they have desktop application, which is useful especially at the beginning when you need to create like the setup the configuration at the beginning, because otherwise you need to do it in JSON, and there is like tens and tens of different parameters. So it's really nicer and more comfortable to do it in the application, in the desktop application. I also read about the OpenAPI generator. It's a very good alternative as well. A great advantage of this one is that it supports much more languages. The NSwag supports only C# and TypeScript, I think. And now the final. Was it worth it? Definitely yes, because I had no other choice. But for people that have choice, it's a little bit more difficult, unfortunately. Let's start with the negatives. The first one is steep learning curve. If you are not used to writing YAMLs and using linters and validators, it feels a little bit awkward at the beginning, and you will spend some time just trying and being lost. So it's definitely worth taking into account if that time is really worth it. Another one is a little bit weird, because I cannot get rid of the feeling that it brings extra step, because you cannot just write code. You need to go to specification first, do some changes there, then generate a C# plant, and then you can start working. So it feels like a lot of extra steps. But there are, of course, underlying advantages of that approach, but you have to take that into account if it's really worth it or not for your flow. And the last one is a little bit connected with the first one. It basically means that since you don't have probably experience with the specifications, it's going to be difficult to write a good one. So it's definitely a good idea to use the linters and validators right from the beginning. And if you write garbage specification, since everything else is generated from that specification, everything else will be garbage as well. So that's an unfortunate thing. Let's be a little bit more positive now, and let's talk about the advantages. Big advantage that I felt is that I feel like it forces you to better design thinking, because it kind of shields you from the implementation details. You don't think about the databases, you don't think about the domain model, application layer, logic. You just think about the API from the user's perspective, and I think it really makes the designing a little bit more easier. The second advantage is single source of truth. It's kind of self-explanatory, because once you write the specification and you do a little bit of processes around, everything else will be kind of automatically synced and regenerated. So that's very nice. And the last one, and probably the biggest point, is easier collaboration. Because especially if you cooperate with multiple teams, like inside your company, so for example, front and backend, or if you work with external team, as I did, it really helps with collaboration, because you can, both of the teams can come together and brainstorm what is the best specification that suits both of them needs. And you don't really need to know much about the other side's implementation details, or even you don't have to care about their language. So that's really nice that you can brainstorm with them and come up with best possible solution. And another advantage connected with that is that once you have the specification, it's both of the teams can start working on right away. Because, for example, in my case, when we agreed on the specification, and since they are writing the server side, I didn't have to wait for them. I was able to simply generate a mock API from the specification and test my application against this mocked API. So that's really good. When I was thinking about all the pros and cons, I kind of started doubting which one is the one that drives the decision. And I came up with the conclusion that it's the last one. And especially because of, when you think about the first point, you can kind of force yourself to do the better design thinking. You don't need to write YAMLs. You just need a little bit of, you just need to, you can force yourself, I think. And the other one, single source of truth, you can kind of create process that will, whenever you touch some controller, the specification gets regenerated. So it's not really, it doesn't have such a value, I think. But in case of collaboration, I think that's something that the code-first approach is really missing. And at the end of the day, I think that the spec-first approach doesn't really help you to write the code faster, but it helps everyone else to not wait for you. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Are you now the the spec first guy, or you will fall to code first when possible?
I think it really depends on the task. Like if you're doing just internal API, it doesn't bring so much value. But I think especially in my case, when I cooperated with like an external company, I think it really helped. So the collaboration, I think, is like really the decision point.